Okay, so we did our project on the calculus and mathematics behind elections. So we chose elections because they're part of everyone's lives. They happen at least every 2 years, and they're pretty important. So if you know what you're doing, it helps a lot when you're voting, and it can help you figure out who's going to actually win the election beforehand, or everyone votes. So we're just going to explain a little bit about the different voting systems. So here in the US, we have plurality voting, which is also known as first past the post. And basically what that is you go in and you vote on a ballot, and it has all the names down, and whoever gets the most votes wins. Whoever passes majority wins. And then in a 2-round vote, it's similar, except the first round, it has all the names, but then they pick like the top 2 or 3 people, and they have a second voting round, and then whoever wins that round wins the election.
If no one gets 50% of the vote in the first round.
And then in the fully proportional vote, it's you go and you vote, and they take what percent of like each party got the vote in like the whole country, and that's the percent of like the seats that end up in the government. So like in a Congress or something, if one party got 50% of the vote, they get 50% of the seats. And semi-proportional is kind of a combination of both, where they have that directly proportional Congress that's related to it, but they still have districts where you elect like a representative. So that way you get that full proportionality of the whole country, but you still get like area representation. So you still get someone representing your district or your city that you live in. And then, yeah, like I said, in the US and in Minnesota, we have the first past the post system, so that's mainly where we're going to be focusing on.
Okay, so first we're going to talk about problems with first past the post, like wasted votes kind of, and then gerrymandering, which is what is considered. So with first past the post, elections aren't, like, for House and stuff, they aren't won by whoever gets the most votes. It's whoever gets the most seats to the legislator. And then this is kind of about gerrymandering, where people, because the legislator draws the districts that they vote in, so they try to draw districts that groups them together so that they can win more seats. And it's a real life problem. And these are some Senate seats from,
I think those are House seats.
House seats from the US, and they're pretty like just weird, and they just group up different groups of people so that they can get that vote easily. And then vote concentration and wasted votes. So these are 2 state senate, so like the state senate, like not senators, but state senate. And the first one is a really close one. So they're gonna like put a lot of energy in it, a lot of campaign, and then it's whoever gets the most gets that seat. And then that's very different compared to this one, where it's they call it safe seat, where they have such a large amount of votes that it's more about whoever wins the party nomination, not who gets the most votes. So the bigger race is whoever the DFL candidate is in that district, not Republican versus DFL. So, and then the only problem with this is everyone here is like vote counts and it's very competitive. But here you got 60% of the people who their vote doesn't really matter, kind of say, because they already basically won the election.
And this is kind of where wasted votes comes into play too, because since first past the post is only polarity, it's only who has the most votes. Technically, all of the votes that were not needed to win that seat are essentially wasted. So if you look at District 62 on the bottom, where it's more than almost an 80-point margin, you could subtract how many of those votes, and they would only need 3,898 to win the seat, because it doesn't matter how many votes that you have, it's just enough to be the most. Whereas in 14, there are less votes wasted because there are only a few hundred votes separating first and second place.
And then this is kind of a little more explanation to gerrymandering. And this is like a fairly simple diagram. And so it's 50 people vote, and then that's the first one. And then the red gets 40%, and blue gets 60%. So there's a couple ways you could split up, and because there's no and then this is for seats, so there's 5 seats. So they can either split up like this first one, where blue is going to get all the seats, even though they only have 60% of the vote, and it kind of makes the other people not want to vote because they're not going to win. Or you have this one, which is, it might seem worse because because blue isn't getting as many seats as it should, but it's more proportional to the vote because at least red's getting some seats. And that one, red would win because they drew the lines so that they have just enough reds to beat out the blues. And that's kind of how gerrymandering works for seats. We try to maximize the amount of districts that you're going to win, and then try to get opponent districts to have as many of their voters in there so that their votes only go to that district and not other competitive districts.
Yeah, combining the two slides that we had before with the wasted votes, all of these four are essentially what you call packing districts. The way that they're drawn is that they're trying to get as many voters that vote one way into one place possible, so that they'll end up with a result of around 80-something% like that, so the opposition's votes are wasted.
So yeah, so on this idea of the disproportionality between like the different districts and the votes of the people, there's a thing called the Gallagher Index, which is a mathematical equation that finds the difference between like the percent of votes gained and the percent of seats gained. So it's gonna figure out how disproportionate the vote to seat ratio is. So we use it on the House and the Senate. So it ranges from 1 to 100 because the numbers you use in it are percents. So what you do is you find out the difference between the number of votes and the percent of votes and the percent of the seats gained, and then you take that difference and you square it, and then you add them all up, and then you take the half of that and you square root of it. And if it was like a 3-party system, you take a third of it, so you divide by how many parties are, and then you take the square root, and then end up with a number ranging from 1 to 100, or is it from 0 to 100? 0 to 100. So 0 would be completely proportional, so that means the percent of votes and percent of seats exactly the same, and 100 would be completely unproportional. So say one party got 100% of the votes, but somehow the other party got 100% of the seats. So for the Minnesota House, we got a 6.85, and then for the Senate, we got a 1.407. So the Senate's going to be a lot more proportional to the vote and seat ratio than the House is.
Okay, and then on the topic of the Minnesota State House and then the Minnesota State Senate, there's 2 houses, just like the national one, and the districts are broken up, so there's so many Senate districts, and every Senate district is broken into 2 districts, and each of those districts is a House district, and then those are just pictures of them. That one's the Senate, and this one right here with the crammed one is the House. And then this is the House election, and it's every 2 years, and we kind of analyze the last 5 elections and the previous election change, and then there are 134 seats, and each seat is 40,000 people, so they just keep increasing the amount of people needed per seat. And then they're A or B because there's 2 of them per Senate district. And then one of the things, that guy was disqualified, that won the grayed out one, because he didn't live in the district, so they didn't find that out until after, so they had a re-election kind of.
Some sort of issue with that candidate.
And then we kind of found the secant lines, or the trend and change between the amount of seats they had over the years, and we went back 5 elections, so it was 2008. And then over 5 years, the GOP, or normally Republicans, they got 0.18% increase yearly, and then the DFL, normally called the Democrats, they got negative 0.72 yearly. And they're different because I think in 2008 they had an independent in the House, so they lost their seat. The independent lost his seat, so that's why they're not exactly equal. And then just the last election, the change, the Republicans gained 1.5%, and the DFL lost 0.095%, and that's because the House there's a lot more seats, so a lot more independents can get on, so it's not exactly proportional. And then that's a graph of the change over the last 5 election cycles.
So the Senate is elected every 4 years, except on a census year. And then, so we did the same thing, so we took the last 5 elections, and we found the average between them, and there were gonna be 67 Senate districts, and they each have about 80,000 people in them. So the Republicans gained about a 0.232% increase every year, and the Democrats also gained a 0.01% increase. And then over just the last election, the Republicans got a 1.4% increase, and the Democrats lost about 1.4%. So we put the numbers of seats won in each party into a graph, and then so that kind of looks like an interval. So we decided to integrate it, and then we divided by 5 for the 5 elections, and then we use these to find the average number of seats.
So then, based on these averages that we found, you can then assess what the average performance of the parties is and where they kind of are. Because in our 2-party system, we tend to kind of have an upswing and a downswing of each party, that there's not really a lot of third parties, so one will come and go and the other one will replace. So right now, the Republicans are currently in a statistical upswing because they have 34 seats in the Senate and 77 in the House, which are both above their averages. Whereas the Democrats are in a downswing with their current 33 below their average, and in the House also below their average. So statistically, we can look at that and say that the Democrats have a much better chance in the next election of increasing their seats than the Republicans do because they are below their average.
Okay, so yeah, now there was actually an election in Nova Scotia in Canada recently. So that last slide was our old title slide, and it wasn't very serious, but we couldn't find the will to delete it, so we just stuck it in there. So we're gonna try to predict the Nova Scotia elections.
Yes, and so Nova Scotia's election system is very similar to ours as well. So it works pretty well to work in what we do into this. So in difference to us though, they have 3 major parties, which are the Liberals, the Progressive Conservatives, and the New Democrats. And so they have 51 seats, whereas ours have more seats, but they have 51, so it also made it easier to predict. So, one of the main ways that we use to predict elections are opinion polls, but opinion polls aren't always the best way to look at things because there are different types, they can be biased, things like that. So what you need to account for when you're looking at opinion polls are the types of polls. So there are a few main ones. There are phone polls, so as you'd expect, online polls, in-person polls, and IVR polls, which are interactive voice response. So it's like a phone call, but it's not a live person. It's essentially a robocall asking you what party you would vote for. You also need to look at the bias of the polls, because certain polls will sample different groups disproportionately. So say you'll be sampling more voters of one party, or you'll be sampling more younger people or more older people, and usually that tends to skew the results. Also, you need to look at the historical accuracy of the polls, whether these polling companies were close to the actual result last time. So what we did for this election is I looked at the average poll error in the last 2 elections for the 3 companies that were doing opinion polls for this election. And so Main Street Polling Company had never done polls in this election before, so I could not find error for them. Corporate Research had slight underestimations for the PCs and slight overestimations for Liberal and NDP. And Forum had underestimations for PC and NDP and overestimation for Liberals. So I factored that in. So the way that we averaged and got these polls to the way we wanted them was with a few different factors. We only used the most recent poll from each company because the closer a poll is to the actual election date, generally the more accurate it is. Also, polls that are more recent are given more percentage weight. Polls with a larger sample size are also given more weight because because larger sample size tends to get closer to the actual population. If you sample 5 people about something, it would be much less accurate than surveying 1,000 people. And then average error from the last 2 elections that I calculated on the last slide was used to correct polls. So that gave us, putting all of those factors together, that gave us 24% of the weight was given to the corporate poll, 45% was given to the foreign poll, and 30% was given to the mainstream poll, which gave us a result of 38.01% for liberals, 35.04% for progressive conservatives, and 22.8% for NDP. And so this was how I figured out which way things would be weighted. I set the largest poll and the most recent poll at 100% of the weight, figured out where the proportion was to each one, and then added those 2 scores together, took their total, and figured out how much weight they should each have. And also with that, I found the standard deviation for the polls so that we could see, okay, what is our 95% low, and what is our 95% high on the end? Because standard distribution, 68% on either side, 95% the last 2 on each side. And so it's not enough to get only the percentage in a first past the post election, because as we've already stated, we're winning seats, we're not winning votes. So the way that we had to do this was take the vote shares in the last election and then plug them into a spreadsheet based on what the polls said. And what I did was I plugged in what the polls said the vote shares should be, and we subtracted or added the change in each party from 2013 to 2017 to predict who would win each seat. So comparing that with a professional poll here on the right, ours is the left. I kind of formatted it to look like a professional poll. So we were predicting, along with the percentage votes, we predicted 24 seats for the Liberals, 24 Progressive Conservatives, and 7 for the NDP. We need 26 for a majority, so that would be a Liberal minority. So then, was this right? Slightly. So looking at what happened, so we predicted 24, 20, 7, and we got 27, 17, and 7. So we were 3 seats off for the Liberals, 3 seats off for the PCs, and we perfectly predicted for the NDP. And for the vote percentage, we underpredicted the Liberals by about 1.5%. We underpredicted the PCs by about a little under 1%. And then we overpredicted the NDP by almost 1.5%, which all of these are well within the margin of error. And so the way that you can kind of account for that is that either the polls aren't accurate, that there's changes in momentum, depending on what happens in the last few days. So even the best polls and even the best ways to describe it can be a little bit off. Because if you look at the professional pollster, we were about the same amount off as him. We just predicted more seats one way or another at the bottom rather than at the top of the chart.
Oh yeah, we just like to remind everyone, vote Kokler, 2036.
Is that when you'll be 35?
Yeah.
And
And that
And
is
that's it.